Hi everyone, welcome to Unit8 Talks, our webinar series on data and AI. For those who are new to the series, we're Unit8, a Swiss data analytics and AI company, driving the adoption of data science in the industry and committed to sharing our best practices. Just a few words on the admin. This session is for you, so please ask any questions you may have using the Q&A panel on your left-hand side. The session is recorded, so you'll receive by email the recording after the session, and we will upload the recording on our YouTube channel. Without any further delay, today's topic is about fraud detection through artificial intelligence, and machine learning in financial institutions. And you will be hosted by the two gentlemen on the right side of the next slide. And let me introduce them quickly to you. So first, Abdallah is our customer engagement lead at Unit8, and he has experience in the fintech industry. Co-presenting is Andreas, our head of digital and AI consulting practice. He also used to be UBS Switzerland's strategy manager. Abdallah, Andreas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Samir, for the intro. So to give you a quick overview of the agenda, we'll spend literally just 2 minutes on briefly giving some more details on Unit8, who we are and what we do. And then we'll deep dive into what AI means in banking, and in particular what fraud means in banking, what are the current trends. And we'll close off the session with some case studies that we implemented for our clients, and we share some best practices on how to conduct AI-based fraud prevention. As you can see on the next slide, we are a data and AI services provider and essentially enable our customers turning data into value. We are a one-stop shop to solve all kinds of business problems with data using AI and other cutting-edge techniques that are subsumed under AI, such as machine learning and neural networks, deep learning, advanced analytics, and we essentially build customized software which we then implement in the client systems that then run AI use cases. And the whole service offering also includes more conceptual strategic topics, AI governance, AI center of excellence, build up, and AI roadmap and strategy development. We have so far conducted more than 50 projects across a range of industries, and we have a focus area within the financial services. We're working for some of Switzerland's largest banks and insurance companies, and you'll hear more about that later. As you can now see on the topic of AI in banking, on the next slide, you'll see that AI is actually becoming more and more important within banking. It's becoming a strategic imperative. So it's really no longer a choice, but banks have to adopt AI technologies if they want to stay competitive. There's also a huge value generation potential of AI for banks. It's a huge number of more than $1 trillion per annum, so that's 1,000 billion. And really the topics covered, they range from the risk functions, which could be fraud prevention, which will be the focus of today's session, but they go up to marketing and sales and covering a large range of other areas. And we're going to show some exemplary use cases on the next slide. So here, this is really a very quick overview of the functions that AI covers within banking. Starting with sales, which you see in the top left of the slide, topics such as sales force steering and next best action, extending to marketing, which could be hyper-personalized content engagement. Then on the top right, moving to the back office and central functions, AI is of great help with onboarding and KYC. And of course, AI also extends to the asset management and trading areas. Here, an example could be rogue trading prevention, or also identifying outperforming trading strategies in the market, for example, by automatically analyzing news sentiment on certain stocks. And then, of course, it extends to the whole topic of data platforms and analytics, where also we as Unit8 have a great deal of experience. So these data platforms, they're really the foundation for the AI use cases which then run on them, and more large banks are adopting these kinds of data science platforms. So you may now want to ask the question, why is this topic of AI being so prevalent these days? Essentially, the explanation is very easy. You see it on that slide. It's because of the 3 ups and the 1 down. So the first up will be that we now have a massively increasing amount of data. Just imagine all the data that is generated when you imagine a typical banking consumer logging into their e-banking, into their mobile banking. All of that kind of behavioral data, transactional data leaves digital traces and can be processed. The second reason is that compute power is ever increasing. Imagine Murphy's law, roughly every 18 months, you have a doubling in computational power. And of course, the third up is the technological advancement. You have more and more powerful algorithms, which are then boosting this AI processing capabilities. And all of this is enabled also by a large drop in storage prices, but not just the drop in storage prices, but also in the drop in processor prices. If you ignore the current spike that you have seen in the last few months, typically storage and processing on a per unit basis is going down consistently. Now that's already been my brief high-level intro on AI and banking. And now my colleague Abdallah is going to take over and tell you more about what fraud trends there are.
Thank you, Andreas, for this introduction. And let's maybe start with the environment and see a bit what are today the key figures to have in mind when it comes to the fraud. Today, specialists and analysts are seeing the fraud topic as a growing concern, and specifically with the acceleration of the digitalization. And when we discuss with our client, with Andreas, we see that the fraud and the cybercrime in general has shifted from an opportunistic approach, where fraudsters are a one-man show, to an industrialization and a professionalization of the industry. To give you just a hint, the cybercrime industry is actually today a real industry. It is an industry on its own, and it is generating more money than the entertainment industry. And we can see in this slide that none of the industry are today exempt from fraud, and financial services are one of the key targets, the principal target of fraudsters. When it comes to cybercrime, you can see that there is a rise of 15% in cybercrime in 2020, and it's huge when you see the other figures in the health industry and even in the energy industry. Fraudsters are becoming more and more creative, and they are targeting on purpose some specific industries. If we deep dive a bit, I'm sure that all of you are very well aware that the banking landscape priority has been evolving with the time, and now more so accelerating in the change of digitalization. One of the trends that we are seeing is that the banks are massively investing into the digital banking. The good news is that the banks are providing better customer experience by using digital services, and they are attracting new customers thanks to these digital services. These new channels are generating a high volume of data that we can use, of course, for example, as highlighted by Andreas, to profile our customer, to propose them some tailored services. But they are also creating more opportunities for fraudsters as the channels are multiplicating quite quickly. And the reason why the fraud is booming is firstly due to the increased complexity of the bank IT system, which created more opportunities for fraudsters to exploit and remained often undetected. To summarize, from digital banking to social network, there is a growing number of channels that the banks has to manage. that makes harder for the banks to have a clear overview of all the activity that are taking place on their system. And of course, there are more risk, reputational and operational risk to manage. Let's have a look on the history of the fraud. And historically, when we think about the fraud within the bank, we think about the cash being stolen from the vault. But now fraudsters are becoming much more creative, and they are coming up with many more new ways to commit fraud. So we have to make sure that we stay ahead as best as we can, and that we stay creative in our way that we are addressing the fraud. And we're gonna see later how AI and machine learning can help us to stay creative and to stay ahead of fraudsters. We see that globally the fraud losses are tremendous. We are talking about 42 billions that have been reported as a fraud losses in 2020, and that is obviously a significant number. But the biggest issue and the biggest concern is that this number is growing year after year. And as the fraudster today has the ability to delete the traces of their crimes, to evade from risk control and audits of the banks, most of the frauds remain undetected. So we are seeing only the type of the iceberg. On the fraud part, we have two kinds of fraud. Of course, we have the internal fraud and the external fraud. Let me share with you just a quick story that I have around a fraud that I have met a few years ago, and to show you how simple can be to create a fraud today in a bank and this environment. It's a story of the IT admins of a bank who created a generic profile and use this profile to grant full right access to their internal accomplices, who then committed the fraud by making money transfer or by performing data extraction and stealing customer data. Afterward, the IT logs had been deleted from the fraudster, leaving the bank without any evidence of the fraud and without any identification of the fraud. Of course, these fraud attacks led to a major financial loss and a reputational damage for the bank, and specifically when the fraudster has been able to erase the trace of their fraud. So you can see how interpenetrated can be the internal and the external fraud, and the banks has to build their shield in order to protect themselves and protect the asset of their client. And historically, when we see the world of the fraud prevention in the bank institution, it has always been largely based on rules. Bankers and engineers were integrating rules engine on the banking information system to detect the most common fraud patterns. For quite a long time, this was sufficient, but today fraudsters are taking advantage of these non-evolutive rules to bypass the controls implemented by banks, like in the 2016 Bangladesh Swift hacking, where criminals maliciously sent a malware by email to their victim, and they easily breached the first line of defense of the bank. 35 payments transfer has been issued during the long weekend and leading to a loss of 100 million of USD. The funny things in this story is that the hack has been detected because of a mistake of the hackers. Actually, they wrongly spelled the recipient name, and that raises the suspicion of the bank compliance team. So you can see how sometimes it can be very helpful to find a fraud, and it can be very difficult also. The question that we have now is how to protect the customer assets with rules, rule-based at a time when, for instance, you can have your client connecting from their Swiss e-banking platform. They are in New York and they are performing a transaction in Morocco. That give a complexity on the client behavior, and this complexity has to be understood by the bank in order to prevent from fraud. So how do you want to define rules to detect fraud when there are almost as many different behavior as there are customers? Let's have a look. It's true that tackling fraud comes with number of challenge, and personally, it keeps puzzling me to see how deploying AI and machine learning technology for frauds prevention seems to be so difficult. There is some challenges. The first one is that extracting the required data to build analytics use cases can be a challenge on its own. And let's say that the banks manage to extract the required data, which is just a technical problem, but cleaning, enriching, normalizing, and remodeling the data for banking fraud use cases is a whole new project. The second major issue is that technological mastery alone is not sufficient for AI projects to succeed today. Implementing a data analytic use cases for fraud require a strong involvement of the business expert, meaning the fraud investigation team, the compliance team, the risks teams. As long as with the data scientists, they will build a clear understanding of on the business issue, on the use cases, and they will be hand by hand be able to create, manage, and make evolve the right machine learning model in order to prevent from fraud. Data engineer can help also with their part. They are able to help by using the right data extraction approach to have the data in real time in the right format, and they are also able to help you identify the right use cases to deliver the full value of a prevention project. So if I have to summarize today the challenge that the bank are facing in adopting AI for fraud prevention, sorry, it's about technology, it's about how to implement methodology, but it's also about complying with regulation that comes up every year with new constraints. AI technology today are increasingly integral to the world we are living in, and the banks are more and more deploying these technologies at a scale to remain relevant. Let's move to our experiences and how we are using AI for our clients. When we look at the rule-based approach, it's very reactive approach, meaning that we detect that the transaction has been performed maliciously, but it's too late. The money left the bank, and it's too late to prosecute. We have to keep in mind that fraudsters do not commit a fraud overnight. They prepare their case. For example, they will look at the dormant account, they will identify their opportunity. So basically, they are sending to us some alarming red flags that we can detect. And when there is an atypical user behavior combined with other scored user action, the bank can take action. So how a fraudster thinks today? He's gonna test the feasibility of the fraud by inquiring potential target and making small-scale replica in his own environment. He's gonna then execute the fraud, and the preparation and the planning of the fraud itself is already the phases of committing the fraud. He's gonna conceal the fraud. He's gonna try to hide or to delete any trace of the fraud and history of the fraud, and then he's gonna convert by withdrawing the money or making the payment transfer. The thing is that most of the banks today are focusing on trying to catch and to control, when by leveraging artificial intelligence, the bank can monitor financial transaction, but they can also monitor the user behavior, the suspicious action, and then they can really go from a reactive approach to a proactive approach. AI, the really value proposition of AI in this kind of project is that it enables the banks to be proactive, and it's one of the biggest key value proposition. Usually with a rule-based approach, as I told you before, the bank are focusing mainly on investigation, on detecting a transaction, and a lot of banks today are in a victim mode. position, not because they want it, but because of outdated process and technology. So AI can really help you to build this contextual information around the transaction that helps you to prevent the fraud, and not detecting, but much more preventing the fraud. Let's have a look on the project that we had with a client. The project we have implemented for actually a leading Swiss bank has led us to analyze the past trade transaction in order to understand a transactional behavior of the employees and of the client. The machine learning model was able to analyze a very important data of historic data, capturing what users usually do and comparing their behavior with the action. Then whenever a transaction is inputted into the system, the AI is able to compare that specific transaction against the trader profile and compute a risk score for it. If the risk score is high, the machine can push an alert for further investigation. So really, the four-step approach here is critical in order to identify the little red flag, to flag the transaction that has been identified, and also enable the team to reject the transaction or to have some insights about the transaction. And the key benefits of the solution that we have implemented is that we enable the team to have a real-time alert to detect the atypical activities. We created a consistent view of user behavior that helped to create a profile and a model around the user behavior. We unified the data model in order to be able to scale the approach in another environment. And also, what is key and critical is that most of the team, the compliance team and the fraud investigation team, want to focus on the real case and want to reduce the false positive. So reducing the false positive alert is a challenge on its own, and the machine learning model, the supervised machine learning model, is one of the answers to that in order to improve the model automatically. So here I just want to highlight how we did it and the result of it. Our clients already had a hard-coded non-machine learning anomaly detection process in place, but they wanted to improve upon it due to several shortcomings. For one, their algorithm required manual setting and many parameters. Secondly, the rules which this approach utilized were hard-coded and inflexible to the change in the data set. Furthermore, the approach treated every transaction in isolation, disregarding how it relates to the data set as a whole. Lastly, they were dealing with many false positive anomaly flags, and we were able to drastically reduce this anomaly flags. So in the first graph on the top left of the slide, you can see in the x-axis that represent the anomaly score that is computed by the model, and the y-axis represent the number of entries that has been an anomaly score in the given range. Then the investigation team can focus on the abnormal activities / abnormal transaction by digging into the dashboard, and by setting a threshold related to the limited amount that they want to analyze. We give them a list of all the fraudulent transactions and all the associated detail, and we have been able to provide explanation on why this transaction has been flagged and what are the points at the dataset point that has been taken into consideration to analyze the transaction. So you can see here that from an insight, from a detection to an insight to an analyze to at the end taking an action, blocking a transaction, the AI can really help you from the beginning to the end to have a holistic view of the transaction and a holistic view of the user behavior in order to analyze the transaction. Let's jump to use cases and trader monitoring use cases that we also implemented for our client. So the project we have been implemented led us to analyze the transaction, and we really wanted to focus on some of the key problems that they have with the rogue trading. Of course, the rogue trading in the bank industry is quite a hot topic, and it is having quite a huge impact, negative impact on the bank reputation and also the cash reserves. What we have done is that we have gathered the system in order to collect and analyze thousands of signal of each trader. We built the profile of the trader, and we have been able from this profile to compare at the scale the transaction and to analyze any misbehavior. Of course, one of the benefits of this project was that we have been able to help the client to minimize the risk, to lower the bank exposure, and also to limit the bank regulatory fines in order to protect them from regulation. Finally, we use some data engineering and clustering technology, and of course anomaly detection to implement this project.
Now you have learned a lot about what AI means in banking and what fraud means in banking and how fraud can be prevented in banking. And I'd now like to spend the last minute or so of the presentation on how we as Unit8 can actually help you. And you see on the next slide the kind of formats in which we typically collaborate with our clients. You see on the very left that we offer discovery workshops. These are typically very short, tailored workshops on specific topics that help clients to learn about key AI concepts. We also consult with clients and help them to identify the right AI use case to get started on their AI journey. And typically we make brainstorming sessions, and via design thinking methods, we build a funnel of use cases which we then narrow down to the ones that make the most sense to get started with. And these ones that we then select, they are piloted, which means we quickly test them and pilot them with rapid prototyping within like 1 to 3 months to get the first business benefits. And then of course we also engage in larger projects with our client to solve the AI challenges that they face and fully roll out and scale AI solutions. Now that's been in a nutshell what we do. If you are interested in working with us, feel free to drop us a note. We're also still hiring. We have more than 15 positions open. If that's something you're interested in, check out our website and apply. And I'd like to finish with this quote. When it comes to AI, no matter whether it's fraud prevention or another area, it's really important to dream big. But whilst it's good and important to have these big dreams, it's also important to then in a way get into the implementation mode, and then it's perfectly fine to have a small start, and it's better to have a small start than no start at all. And we hope that with that we could convey some lessons and some new insights to you. And I'd like now to close this presentation and open the floor to any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. So we have a couple questions. Several of them we can summarize as: how does Unit8 typically engage or collaborate with clients to implement such a fraud detection approach?
So I think I can comment on that. We as Unit8, we have a very collaborative working mode. We typically come on site and build a joint team together with our client. So there would be data scientists or data engineers or solution architects, no matter what the skill set is, that would be embedded in the client teams and then jointly develop the solution. Typically, we work in an agile mode, and it's also important for us to kind of be flexible and be able to pivot along with the client's needs. And then, I mean, depending on the scale of the problem, we would bring the right tech stack to our clients and develop a joint solution.
Thanks. And now maybe a bit more technical question. How can artificial intelligence help adapting to an ever-changing fraud environment or fraud approaches?
That's the golden question, Samir. Because it's true that fraudster creativity push us to be more flexible when it comes to fraud use cases. But I think that advanced analytic and machine learning specifically provide an answer to this scenario. I mean, the machine learning models evolve based on the new events and data, and they can recommend new rules that continuously enhance detection to provide an advantage in fighting against the fraud. And in addition, machine learning models can provide an explainability of the fraud into why decisions are made and give the banks more insight in the context of the fraud. So machine learning today models can help you really to be on top of the fraudster, and sometimes to read into the mind of the fraudster in order to prevent from fraud.
Thank you, and I think the presentation was crystal clear because I don't have any more questions for you. So I'll thank everyone for tuning in about potential on this session about the potential benefits of AI in the field of fraud detection. As I said earlier, you'll receive the recording of the session by email, and you can also find all our past episodes on YouTube. Just a bit of advertising. The next webinar is planned on the 17th of June. Just follow our social media to get more information about that. Thanks, Andreas. Thanks, Abdallah, for the engaging session, and we wish you all a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.